we shifted to not require people to be in the office, and we changed our offices to what we call conversation spaces.
Tell me a little bit about how you bring the organization with you along on this journey, because I think that's a really important point.
What we ended up doing at Drift was we created these work Wednesdays. If you walk out of the meeting and as you're walking from the conference room to your desk, was a decision made. Now you got to communicate that decision back to the 4 other people that don't live near Boston.
Hello, heroes of hybrid work. I'm Jenny Mobius and an SVP at Skeda, where I'm pretty lucky I get to help organizations bring their hybrid workspaces to life every day. Part of that mission includes bringing you the latest data and insights from today's top voices, researchers, and business leaders so you can make the best decisions for your business. On today's pod, Dena Upton, former Chief People Officer at Drift and current Head of People at Dandy, shares how Drift successfully transitioned from a strict office-based model to a flexible hybrid model, the positive impact of transitioning the office to what they called conversation spaces, what they did when the company was very split on remote versus hybrid versus on-site preferences, and tips for combating proximity bias. Hi, Dena. Welcome to the Heroes of Hybrid Work. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, Jenny. Thanks for having me.
What I would love to start with is some of the work that you did at Drift, if that's okay.
Yep.
So at Drift, you successfully transitioned from a strict office-based model to a flexible hybrid model post-pandemic. So tell me a little bit about that story and what worked, what didn't work. What did you learn from that?
Sorry, I got the D's all mixed up. So Drift, when I joined Drift, and when David and Elias started Drift, it was very much they intentionally set Drift up to be an in-office company, and we weren't shy about it. We communicated that in the interview process. David and Elias felt that connection at that level, we needed people in the office. We were iterating. The company was small. We were growing quite a bit. And that was really important to them as it was to develop and build culture. And so we were very intentional Monday through Friday in the office. We told individuals when they were interviewing for us that that was expected of them. And that's how Drift grew and succeeded. And then fast forward to the pandemic. We didn't know at that time how long it would go and how long we would be in the office. And David, and our executive team had decided that, with everybody else for health reasons, we, had to send everyone home. And then as the pandemic continued to carry on, David kind of did a 180, or 360 really, and realized that it wasn't about FaceTime, it was about outcomes. And both he and Elias were on a journey to create an equitable company. Our ability to get to diverse talent and opening up where we hired people would help us get there faster. And so we shifted to not require people to be in the office. And we changed our offices to what we call conversation spaces. So they were places where people could connect with each other. You did your solo work at home. But when you were connecting with your teams, those were done in locations. And then we doubled down a little bit on bringing teams together. But go ahead, Jenny.
Let me jump in there because I think our audiences would find this really interesting. So I spoke to a consultant just the other day who talked about even now, how it's so important to have kind of unstructured time when you go into the office. So, not coming in and sitting down at a desk and having like your whole day full of meetings. But so I really love this concept of conversation spaces as almost like the greatest manifestation of this unstructured time that I think people still crave when they go into the office.
Yes. Well, that's the thing, when you're home, you can be really efficient. It's kind of task before relationship. And I think what suffers as a result of that are those relationships and those chance encounters that you're walking into a meeting, you can talk to someone about their weekend, or you run into the kitchen, you're grabbing a coffee and you can talk to your sales rep about some crazy deal that he or she just did. And so it's those chance encounters that you don't have in a remote setting. So when you are together, you're right. We didn't want people to be coming into the office just in a room on Zoom calls on Google Meet all day. We wanted to make sure that there was an opportunity for people to connect with each other.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things that we learned at Drift, which is what we're experiencing here too at Dandy, is for people that are just starting out in their careers, where that's their first job, there's a lot of mentorship and experience that you gain from seeing how people are on a call or how they're interacting with their colleagues. And you miss that in a remote only world. And so for people that this might be their first job, whether or not you're a BDR or you're an SDR or you're a customer service rep in your first job, in-person connection is really important, and that training and sort of mimicking happens when you're watching other people. The role modeling happens when you're watching other people. And so we realized at Drift, and we realized that here too at Dandy, is for some of those positions where, and you can't just say, okay, I'd like my manager and their direct report to be in the office, because you have to build a whole team for those people that are learning how to work and how to adjust as a first-time employee. And so we were starting to realize that at Drift, and we experienced the same thing here at Dandy. So there's certain positions where we're not mandating that everybody be in the office 5 days a week. We're not going back. We kind of went through a one-way door. We're not going back to that. But for teams where training and development and listening in on calls is important, we are trying to hire people in those hub locations. And we were doing that at Drift too.
Yeah. No, I couldn't agree more. When I started out at Skeda, I had to set clear expectations for it, almost going back to the basics. Like, these are typical work hours, right? That people need to be available to respond. And so I understand it's kind of those junior level jobs too, where, modeling for them what the expectations are, because expectations at every organization are probably different too. But that was hugely helpful for me, realizing that I had to kind of go way back to the basics with some of these folks who went through college in a remote environment. Right?
Totally. And I think what's so interesting, it's so fascinating to sort of watch these shifts happening. It's not all or nothing. And I think that a lot of organizations are trying to go one direction or the other. And so it's this idea of hybrid work works, but you've got to make sure you have the right foundation in place in order to make it. It's harder to do remote work, but you have to have some of those foundational, those norms, those ways of working, documentation, async connections. Those have to be formalized, because you can't just bump it. Like, communication has to be formalized. It's harder to do. But I do think one of the positive things that came out of the pandemic is that remote work is much more widely accepted, because we had to accept it. So we fast forwarded to a world that we wanted to get to. So we quickly whipshod into this, everybody's 100% remote. And now we're kind of dialing it back a little bit to say, connection, relationship, tasks are important. Yes, you can be really effective because you don't have a 2-hour commute, but then that relationship that you developed with a colleague suffers as a result of it. So you have to blend it a little bit. And it's not one size fits all for every organization, because we're all in different organizations that have different responsibilities and different customers. So we have to adapt.
One of the biggest things that it drives your employees mad about going into the office is how hard it is to find and book a space. If you're using a spreadsheet or point person, you're either drowning your HR ambassador in 20, 30 emails per day just booking desks, or you're giving people headaches trying to decipher the spreadsheet you created. So whatever system you're using, make sure it's incredibly simple to use. If you're using Skeda, booking is simple as visiting the floor map, selecting a time you'd like to book, and choosing how often you'd like to secure it. Users can filter by equipment needs, neighborhoods, and so much more. Then you're done. Get rid of headaches and make coming in as easy as can be. Skeda. Hybrid work, people first.
Correct. Yeah, I agree. So something I was reading about in one of the articles you were interviewed in was the importance of employee surveys. And so tell me a little bit about how you bring the organization with you along on this journey, because I think that's a really important point.
Yeah, I think HR people data is really important. I think historically organizations have relied on anecdotal feedback, but I think measure what matters. I think that, you can survey people as they're walking out the door, but that's kind of too late. Exit surveys are sort of after the fact. I think it's really important to get an idea of where people are, like meeting them where they are. And I think an important way to do that is on a regular cadence of feedback. At Drift and then at Dandy, we do a cadence of employee NPS scores. So how likely are you to promote that organization as a place to work? And then you can get a sense of heat maps. And then you can pulse to ask questions about maybe remote work or their connection with their managers or their connection with performance management or any other aspect of what your people organization is trying to do, but get a sense of that and creating a transparent processes by which you read back the data to the organization. And then more importantly, what are you going to do with it? So it's important to survey, but then you actually have to take the data and action upon it so that you're building sort of organizational trust that way too.
So what do you think was kind of the most important thing you learned by surveying the Drift employees once you were kind of moving back into a hybrid environment? Well,
what was really interesting, we had originally surveyed the organization when we were in a very much in-office-based company, and we told people about that, so they weren't surprised when they walked into the organization. Then when the pandemic hit, we surveyed to ask generally, how often would you come back into the office? Would you want to come back into the office? And the organization was split like a third. And so we realized we're not going to be able to please. There were some people that were really excited about being at home, others that wanted to be back into the office, and then people that were sort of indifferent about it. And so that's what when we're surveying that way, we realized we're not going to please everyone. And it's also hard too, because it's a very personal decision. You don't know, people could have at-home situation which requires them, the commute is really too difficult, or on the flip side, they're just graduating from college and they can't afford very well to live in the city in which they are. So they have 5 different roommates and people on Zoom calls or Google Meet calls all the time. So it's really hard. So you've got, home situations that you're factoring into and where they get the most effective work done too.
Yeah.
So that was what was surprising to us, is there was such a split, considering that, think about it, when we surveyed them, it was like 3 months earlier where we were pretty deliberate about being in the office. Yeah. But people, because like the pandemic sort of shifted, people were scared. They didn't know at that time. If you go back to that time in our lives, people just didn't know what to expect.
So what did you end up doing now that you had a third hybrid wanted on-site, a third wanted remote, and maybe a third were indifferent? How did you action on?
Yeah, what we ended up doing at Drift was we created these work Wednesdays, or work Wednesday. It got to be work Wednesdays, work Thursdays, which were encouraged for people to come into the office. We made them fun. We had, mentor series training. So we kind of wanted to create some FOMO to get people back into the office.
Sure.
And we also wanted the offices to feel like they were buzzing when people were in.
Sure.
So the problem was a lot of people would pick a day, come in one particular day, but then no one else was there. So what happened is they were going into a room and just sitting on a Zoom call and doing the same thing that they were doing at home. So they're like, why am I commuting all the way in? So we wanted to create these communities where people were coming into the office. And so we shifted to and we described what we were trying to build. It wasn't a punishment. It was a celebration of our community. And we wanted to reinvest back into the community and our connection with each other. And again, sort of doubling down on that sort of relationship before task, and people realizing that like building a cross-functional relationship in an organization that's sort of living and breathing is really important to invest in. And the way to invest in that is with time and connection with people. And so the other thing that we did too was really create these quarterly team connections with each other. So historically at Drift, we did a yearly kickoff where everybody across the organization came together. It was kicking off our sales plan and everything that the organization was trying to do. And so when the pandemic hit and we were starting to bring people back, we sort of doubled down on those quarterly department meetings to really connect with people. And it didn't have to be in the office. We did things in Dallas or on the West Coast so that there was fun and connection with people too. I think you have to sort of invest in kickoffs or in-person team meetings, where you're setting the strategy going forward. I think that's really, really important.
Kind of like recharging your batteries, right? If you've been with people in person, then it kind of recharges you, and now you can work remotely for a while, and then you got to come back and recharge, right?
Yep.
So how did you ensure, because I'm sure there was some difficulty with ensuring equity between people who were going in and people who were fully remote now that you've hired this, like most of us, this remote workforce all over the world so that you could get some great talent in the door. What did you do to ensure equity between the two?
Yeah, I mean, one of the reasons why DC, and you probably heard it, he talked about this a lot, was really big on doing one or the other was because of the fact that if you have decisions that are made in the office, the people that are remote feel like they're not included in those conversations. And so a lot of the principles that we put in place for the reason why we went digital, we called it digital first in the first place, was because there were no second-class citizens. We wanted to make sure everyone had an equitable and consistent experience with the organization. And just because you sat right next to the founder didn't mean that you were going to get the next greatest project to work on or a faster promotion. And so we wanted to make sure those principles were still in place. And then we also had an opportunity for individuals, if they were 100% remote, they could connect with with their leaders through those department level in-person interactions. And there was not that feeling of split in the organization where you felt like you were a second class citizen. But you had to double down on that because our fear was if we went back to these 2 days a week in the office, the water cooler conversations would happen again, or a project would be, and they'd give it to the person that was sitting right next to them. So you had to reinforce, well, what were the reasons why we wanted to go digital first in the first place? And let's make sure that we are true to those principles about why we did that. Yeah. And so I think you can see it. You start to look at it as over time in data, like how quickly are you promoting people? Are you promoting people faster who are right near our conversation spaces or our hub locations? Are you promoting people that are remote workers just as quickly? So it takes time to make sure that the system is fair.
It's really smart.
But you also have to sort of reinforce those principles because you can slip back to old ways of working. And our general hygiene around team meetings or documentation or async communication, we were getting really good at that as we started to bring some people back into the office, we didn't want to revert back to a meeting's happening and a side conversation's going on. Or if you walk out of the meeting and as you're walking from the conference room to your desk, was a decision made. Now you got to communicate that decision back to the 4 other people that don't live near Boston that might not have been in that conversation. And so it's just reinforcing those things that are really important. The reason why we went digital first in the first place.
You have to be so deliberate about that, right? Because it's so easy to fall victim to that. You're just walking down the hall.
There's so much fodder. There's so much stuff out there talking about in-person is better, remote is better. Like, is better according to who? But does it work in your organization? And it doesn't matter that someone has an article that's written about the remote, like, we're realizing that people can't advance, or it just depends on what's happening within your organization.
Yeah. So you're commuting to New York, right?
So I am 100% at home, but I'm in New York probably at the beginning because I just wanted to meet the team. I'm actually going to Utah tomorrow because we have a large manufacturing site in Lehi, Utah, and then we're opening another one in Dallas. And we've got large designer populations in Egypt and South Africa. So I'll be going to those locations over the course of this year too. But my normal day is here outside of Boston, but I'm in New York. I was in New York when I first started, and I go usually once every 2 months to the New York office. So, but we have offices and manufacturing sites in different locations, so I like to go there too.
Awesome. So what's the best way for you to stay connected to your team being fully remote? So
this is another David Cancel nugget that I borrowed is I'm a big sort of Sunday night series talker. So I connect with my team. I have sort of thoughts about the week that I'll either do a video about or a podcast that I really want them to listen to. And it's sort of my way of setting the tone of the week with my team.
I love that.
So I do that on Sunday night, just what's on my mind, what books am I reading, what do I want the team to sort of like think about from a talent and people perspective that's outside of their OKRs or what they're specifically working on for that week. So that's a chance for me to connect with the team. And then we get the team together usually on a quarterly basis, our talent and people organization together on a quarterly basis. But it's those quick snip videos that I love to send to the team. That's on my mind. Sharing a one pager about something that's happening. That's how I like to try to make sure that I'm connected with my team.
Just kind of curious because I kind of love this idea and I want to steal it as well. Do you record a Loom and then send it Monday morning?
I do.
Okay.
Usually it's a Loom, or if it's I'm like jazzed up about this podcast. They don't hear a ton from me, but I'll like connect them to a particular podcast. Okay. But it's sort of like it's set intention for the week, get your team sort of thinking about something. We have a book club. So one of the things that we did a lot at Drift was we had a book club. So you could order whatever book you wanted, once a month. And usually we had people connecting about it. But with my team, I'm doing sort of the same thing where, there's a lot of oldies but goodies, that I have loved to read, which sort of reiterate my philosophy on people. And this is a new team for me. They haven't worked with me as long as I haven't worked with them at all, any of them ever. Yeah. And so it just helps so they can sort of understand what I'm thinking or where I'm approaching people decisions.
So what did you call it? The Sunday what?
The Sunday night series.
Sunday night series.
The Sunday night series. TNS.
Sunday night.
Yeah.
TSNS.
TSNS.
Nice. Nice. I love that. All right. Switching gears completely because this one's a fun one. So how are you using AI in HR?
Yes. I love this, Jenny. It's so funny because I just got an email from my children's school about, being careful about AI and how they're going to approach it in the school place. And we take a very similar approach actually to my high school children's approach to AI, but we use it a lot in communication. So we just I'll give you an example. We just ran an EMPS survey for our organization, and our data analyst will feed the data that we had gotten from ENPS to sort of spit out some themes. Mm-hmm. So this is the amount of people that were responding, what we heard. We also use it, in communication. So, as we're 850 person organization, communication channels we're formalizing a lot of the ways that we communicate with individuals. And sometimes we'll use it to use ChatGPT as a way to sort of get a particular voice out to the organization. So we'll use it in that way. So those are just some of the examples of how we're using it.
Yep. And would you say with that EMPS spitting out of kind of some data in a way that makes sense, does it make you more productive? Like how are you?
It does. So it'll kind of hone. Historically, we would use Excel to sort of interpret all the data and get the number of responses. Yeah. It saves time. Totally. Immensely that way.
Totally. That's awesome.
And a lot of times you can go on and say, what are other organizations of our size worried about? So it allows you to sort of sift through large amounts of data in a short period of time.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. All right. So we're coming up on time. So I just always ask this question is, what did you come to this podcast wanting to say? Sometimes I don't ask the right question to get it out of you, and there's some brilliant insight in there that I'm missing out on. So is there anything you wanted to say that hasn't been said?
Yeah, I mean, I think I said it a little bit before, but I'll reiterate it again, is that, hybrid work, remote work, there is no one size fits all. And I think it's, in a sense, sort of doing things that don't scale for your particular organization. And just because you read a great article or you listened to an incredible podcast, you have to make sure that you're applying it specifically to your people and your team. And these are sort of individual lives and individual people. It's a very personal decision. And so I think that the one thing that I wanted to emphasize is that we're all migrating these big shifts in talent and people together. And at the end of the day, if your brand is every little piece of how you talk to candidates, how you promote, when they get into your organization, how you promote them, how do you add them to your alumni network? And it's the same sort of care that needs to go into place when you're sort of defining your digital first, remote, hybrid, or in-office strategy. That be bold, decide what works for your organization and you specifically, and then you'll be able to keep and attract the types of people that you want. Because if it doesn't feel authentic or genuine, then it's not going to work over the long
right.
run.
And it's not just going to magically happen.
No, it's hard. Yeah. And you're going to probably make a mistake. We did. You're going to make a mistake, but if you're open and transparent with your organization around what you're trying to test and learn, they'll kind of go on the journey with you.
What was that? What was the mistake? Kind of curious now.
At Drift?
Yeah.
I think for us, it was, we sort of swung one way over the other. But we were very much an in-office company, and then we switched to very much a digital first and sort of poo-pooed this idea of hybrid. We're now, at Drift, we're migrating more toward a hybrid approach. I think organizations that do
sure.
You can't, there's no one size fits all to it. No. And it isn't a one-way door that you go back through. I think we went through a one-way door in that remote work or digital work is here to stay. You've just got to be able to figure out how you adapt it to your organization. So I think it's like
sure.
we were kind of black and white with a little bit of the way that we externally talked about it, and it's gray.
Yeah. No, and nobody knew how to do it. So
no.
And I don't know that anyone still knows how to do it. That's why we're here talking.
Yeah, exactly.
Today.
It's hard. It's hard.
Yeah. That's awesome, Dena. So last thing, how can people find you?
How can they find me? Oh yeah. So I'm Hey Dena on Twitter. They can find me at, email is dena.upton@meetdandy.com. That's an easy way. And I am more active on LinkedIn than I have been, only because I've been in this listening tour at Dandy. So I've been very internally focused
awesome.
Over a period of time. So
awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us on Heroes of Hybrid Work. It was a huge pleasure to meet you. And
Thanks,
we definitely got a lot of great insights here to share with our audience.